At this time, I'll call the Town Hall meeting for Oak Island, November 12th, 2019 to order. And I'd like to say thank you all for coming. It's a pretty good crowd tonight with this very cold weather coming in. So we're going to try to be pretty efficient tonight with this agenda so we can get everybody home safely before it starts really getting bad. At this time, I'd like to ask Councilman Scott to give the Pledge of Allegiance and the benediction.
Our most gracious and loving Heavenly Father, we thank you for letting us come together tonight as a group, and we ask that whatever decisions we make are pleasing to you. Please bless and watch over all of us, and especially the sick that have no help, and may they feel your loving touch. We ask this in your name. Amen. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, we're going to move straight into public hearing number 1. And that public hearing, the purpose of this staff-initiated text amendment is to define the community gardens. The Unified Development Ordinance permits community gardens in residentially zoned areas, but the ordinance does not have a definition of community gardens. The Planning Board unanimously recommended and approved. So anyone signed up to speak to that?
No, ma'am.
All right, with no one signed up, does anybody want to speak to it before I close that public hearing? At this time, I'll entertain a motion to close public hearing.
I'm sorry, Madam Mayor, I have several questions.
Sure. Jake?
Thank you, Mr. Vares, for volunteering. I appreciate that. You were in motion before the first question. Several very simple questions straight away. The number and location of community gardens, can you give us some detail on that?
We don't have any in Oak Island. There's none that I'm aware of right now.
Okay. In the event one were to be established, is there an approval process that we would require?
Permit would be required, a zoning permit, and that would be all. And I would need to verify that it's in the zoning district that the ordinance allows them to be in, which are the residential ones.
Are you anticipating that we'll be gardening soon, or?
No. I have a big list of UDO revisions that are needed, and this was next on the list. That's all. I haven't had a bunch of calls about it recently or anything.
None in existence presently. There will be a process. There will be oversight to verify that, in fact, it's a community garden.
Well, the process, other than getting a permit and me verifying the proper zoning district, that's it. There's no checklist of standards that I would look for, other than, I guess, having a paper record of it.
Thank you.
So basically what you needed was a definition.
Yes, it's not defined, but it's mentioned, yes.
Just out of curiosity, are these things popular in other towns and cities? Or?
Depends where you are. Yes in some, not in others. I live in Wilmington. They are popular there.
They have one in Southport, don't they?
Yeah, they do. It's pretty popular there, too. Thank you, Jake. Any more questions for staff? Anyone? At this time, I entertain a motion to close public hearing number 1.
So moved.
Second, please. All in favor? Thank you. All right, moving on to public hearing number 2.
Take action.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I make a motion to approve the proposed text amendment to Appendix A, definitions, Section A3, and to adopt the associated plan consistency statement.
Second.
All in favor? Thank you. Now we get to move on to public hearing number 2. Purpose of public hearing is to receive citizens' comments on the proposed text amendment to Section 9.9, non-conforming signs, and Section 10.25, prohibited signs, to amend the regulations regarding animated signs and to establish an amortization period for the non-conforming animated signs. Do we have anyone to speak on that?
No, ma'am.
Any questions from council of staff?
I have a question, Madam Mayor.
Jake?
Based on the potential adoption of this particular document, how many non-conforming signs do you project for the island?
Not many at all. I mean, there's not many that exist already to begin with. In the staff report, there's a staff proposed one, and the planning board had recommended it. So my answer to that kind of depends upon which one you select. The staff change took into account, you may recall, the other week by the bridges, there were those 2 new electronic signs the town had purchased. We can put up for emergency purposes or informational purposes, whatever we need. It exempts town signage like that. So that exemption would also affect the rec center, for example. But there's one by Long Beach Road, one where East Oak Island Drive dead ends, Methodist Church, the 2 I just mentioned, community center, just a handful, and potentially one on Long Beach Road. I'd have to verify. There's a pending sign permit for one on Long Beach Road anyway, so I can say that much for sure.
And the abatement period of 6 months, are you confident that will provide sufficient time for these signs to come into compliance?
I think that's more than enough, because all that's really needed, the ordinance doesn't outright prohibit them, but it does make them apply to the timing standards. So it's just a matter of digitally changing on the computer the timing of the signs. So yes.
The answer is yes.
On purpose to be business friendly and accommodating.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
Jake, so what about the rec center? I mean, what are we going to do there? Or we just exempting ourselves, or what's the situation?
More or less. I'd say it's a pretty good summary. Yeah, so it'd be business as usual for them.
Any more questions? No more questions?
No, ma'am.
Is it, I got one more. Is it permissible and lawful for us to exempt ourselves from something like this?
Yeah, I mean, we don't want to hand tie ourselves,
No,
especially if there's a hurricane coming or something, and then we can't get out information the exact way we would like to in the most effective manner. In short, the answer is yes. Yes, it is fine.
Okay.
So, one final point. Thank you, Madam Mayor, for your indulgence. The advent of electronic signs is likely to proliferate. We should anticipate there'll be more of them. This change is driven by safety concerns, correct?
Yes,
So the 60 to 15 is a safety-related concern.
among others, but that was the primary driving factor.
Okay, fair enough. But what I'm trying to get at is, what is the big picture with respect to signage? What is it that we would ideally like to bring about?
Well, it's not just safety, something aesthetically pleasing to the residents and visitors of the island, Sign Island, I've heard it called before. Just having uniformity in the regulations, something that's consistent, that's safe, that is not over in abundance. Those are the sort of considerations that sparked this text amendment.
And I like that answer, but I think part of the problem is, from an idealistic point of view, we would want signage that is efficient in terms of providing people direction or in terms of advancing business interests, but we also want to have signage that is aesthetically pleasing, and how you get to that seems to me is the rub. That's the balancing act. I'm not sure that we have anything more than a philosophy. I mean, I would need to see a plan that takes us there.
That is a balancing act, and people have different values when it comes to that. So what might be aesthetically pleasing to someone could be the opposite for someone else, and vice versa. It's you're never going to make everyone happy when it comes to that. You just have to take in all the criteria and weight it properly and have a methodology you can justify.
So, speaking of methodology, I mean, I think, well, perhaps you're right, there is no agreement, but let's just suppose that a majority of residents find the signage all over the road, literally. And we wanted to bring something about that was more aesthetically pleasing but still effective for business. are there any tools that we can apply? Can we incentivize new signage? Can we compel signage to be altered? And what are the options that we actually have as we try to balance this test?
That's an interesting question, also a difficult one to answer, because when you're talking about incentivizing, I mean, you can set regulations and standards, which would be the gold standard, so to speak, that would get you there. But I mean, if you have an existing sign that was permitted validly at the time and is grandfathered in, even though the ordinance has changed after the facts to make it non-conforming and it's considered a bit of an eyesore, that property has the right to keep it. As far as what things you could put in place to incentivize that business owner to tear what's known as an ugly sign down to put up something new, I'm not sure. I would have to kind of mull that over and think about that. That could get hairy.
Well, I mean, we can talk about the ideal, but if we don't move towards it, we're going to be stuck in the same place. So if all these signs are grandfathered indefinitely, and we can't alter them, and we can't provide an incentive for people to change them, then all we have is rhetoric. And so you're right, it's a very difficult question. Thank you for taking a first swing at it, but I think we've talked a lot about signs for the last several years. We don't seem to be able to make any progress. So that's trying to think big picture, projecting down the road, especially with more e-signs coming online. But thank you.
Madam Mayor, one more thing here. And, you know, if I had a nickel for every time we've gone over these signs here in this town, I believe we could pay off the sewer debt. But the question, Jake, is over here in the front of the memo here, maybe it's something I'm not reading this right. It said the current ordinance with electronic message signs are prohibited except if the message copy changes no more than 60 seconds, and it said often it's violated. And then on the next page, we've got under section 1025 of prohibited signs that are allowed, and this says the copy changes no more often than 15 seconds. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. That'll help me provide a good point of clarification for everybody. The way that is the change in the ordinance that you just described. One of the changes that you guys are voting for now. The ordinance says electronic signs are permissible, and then it gives a few exemptions that we left in that make sense, like the holiday, Christmas lights, and revolving barbershop lights, or electronic sign on a gas station that just might digitally display the temperature and the gas price, something like that. This changes it, per planning board recommendation, to 15 seconds instead of 60 seconds. Additionally, it prohibits them within 200 feet of an intersection with a traffic light. And I would, and this is a good time to mention it, recommend one small modification. In that same sentence, or just below, it says electronic message displays where copy changes no more. I would change the word electronic to, I would just remove it, because that wouldn't take into account those tri-board mechanical signs that can turn. I'm sure you've seen them on billboards, but they make smaller ones too, where it's just mechanical inside, and then they can change the message display. If you just remove the electronic part, it would cover it and clean it up.
And it also is a little confusing there. The section 1025, it says prohibited signs, and it lists all this, and then at the bottom of that, they're exempt. So
That's the sign ordinance for you. It is
okay.
very confusing. I personally took on all sign permit review myself because of the nature of its complexity. It just is always complex and it's frustrating. Yes.
So, Jake, let's try a case study to make sure that we really have this clarification. So, under 1025-2, the Oak Island Golf Course sign would be illegal, right? It's within 200 feet of a light.
Right. This ordinance won't force us to tell them to suddenly they got to tear down their sign now. But it does make it a non-conforming sign, and if it ever burns or a hurricane tears it down, it could not be put up the same way that it is now.
But if it's a hazard to traffic, why wouldn't we
That's a good follow-up question.
Wouldn't
I
we take a
should've
more
included that
aggressive approach?
in the answer I just gave. There are a few of these signs, Beach Life is a good example, that will get, assuming you guys approve this tonight, a courtesy, polite follow-up letter from the town saying, this is what the signage ordinance says, there's an amortization period of 6 months, including the sign you just mentioned. Please, within this time frame, bring it into compliance at that time. Then we would follow up and verify.
I love the golf course, but it strikes me that there's a very dramatic example of something that's clearly within 200 feet at a light.
Yes?
Yeah, okay.
Jake, you did mention billboard. Did we cover that anywhere?
That would be a different section of the ordinance, but billboards are a bit more tricky, because if it's off of a state DOT right-of-way, which I suppose would be by the bridges, 211, the state often has authority and jurisdiction over those. Other than that, if it's within the town limits, it would be us. But there's a whole other section of the ordinance that goes into billboards in great detail.
And they are covered under these same rules?
No, they're covered under a different set of rules that are applicable just to billboards, and I couldn't list them off the top of my head for you right now.
And what would be the difference in this amortization and grandfathering?
So amortization would be for signs that meet the criteria that is listed here within 200 feet of a traffic light, with the timing not compliant with the timing standards that are proposed here. Those would be the signs that would be triggered. So 2 of them, maybe 3. There's another one up Long Beach Road that might be within that 200-foot buffer, might not be. I would find out.
You know, a lot of times when I ask about something, I'll get the answer, well, that's been grandfathered. Who is the person that grandfathers? I mean, you know.
A lot of people
I've
don't
understood
understand grandfathering, but they've heard the term before. It's nuanced. So there's grandfathered in uses, and then there's grandfathered in structures. Grandfathered in uses could be maybe a business that has existed in a residential district back decades ago when the ordinances were very different and it was permitted, and now it's all zoned residential and it's long-standing. It's grandfathered in use, it was permitted, and what our ordinance says in those scenarios, if the business stops operation for 365 days a year, then it is no longer grandfathered and would have to be brought back into compliance at that point in time. You can have a non-conforming structure that is grandfathered, structure, not use, that is non-conforming / grandfathered in a myriad of different ways. Maybe the height regulations were different at the time. Maybe the setbacks were 6 feet instead of 8 feet, etc. All sorts of different scenarios. But assuming it was validly permitted at the time and they got a permit and it was compliant with the ordinance, it's grandfathered in. Just because the ordinance changes, the structure doesn't get a letter saying, no, you got to chop off 2 feet of this to make it compliant or whatever it might be. But if it's ever damaged more than 75% or a hurricane blows the whole structure down or something like that, at that point in time it has to be built back up to the current codes and the design development codes and the building codes, all that stuff.
Okay, thank you. I'm done.
Last call.
I'm done.
Everybody good? At this time, I'll entertain a motion to close public hearing number 2.
Second.
Second, all in favor? All right, you can take action on this tonight, and it was approved by the planning board as written. I don't know, Jake, were you recommending that they change that word or remove the word electronic from any motion they make? Would they like to make a motion to approve or deny? Hearing no motion,
So you're gonna make a motion basically that says everything else is okay, all we gotta do is take out the electronic part? Well, that seems pretty simple.
are you making a motion?
I'm making a motion.
Would you put that in form of a motion, please?
Okay.
make
I
a
hate to
motion.
be emotional, but okay. I would like to make a motion that the word electronic be removed from the current statute and the rest of it passed.
Is that acceptable? Is that good, Lisa?
So just to clarify, it's a motion to approve the amendment in 10.25.2, removing the word electronic from the last sentence, and the changes in 9.9.7.
Everybody understand, is there a second to Charlie's motion? Second?
Second.
Scotty? All in favor? Show of hands? All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Charlie. All right, moving on to, welcome, Brian. Sorry you got stuck in traffic. It's ugly out there tonight. Public hearing number 3. The proposed text amendment is citizen initiated. The text amendment modifies the 8-foot side yard setback for accessory structures in the community business zoning district to be 0 for interior lots. This change will have the accessory structure setback match the principal structure setback. The community business zoning district will be the only area in which this text change would be applied. Is there anyone to speak on that subject?
No, ma'am.
No one speaking? Does anyone want to speak with Jake to clarify anything? Councilman Bott, would you like to say?
I have no questions. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Christian, Scotty?
Yes, I do have one. Okay, Jake, so got 2 lots side by side, so you put the building on the lot line, and then the neighbor, he wants to put one on the lot line so the buildings are actually touching, is that correct?
Yeah, it is specific to the CB district, as many structures already in that district already are.
And the principal building, then how close to the principal building would these accessory buildings, how close could they be?
As close as they wanted, there's no regulation restricting that.
Now, other than this one applicant here, how many other people have problems with this? Or have we had any other?
Well, I think that question, a better way to put it in perspective, how many commercial applications do we get where an commercial accessory structure is involved? The answer is not many. So to say that it doesn't happen a lot, it's just for this one person, I think would be a bit of a misnomer, because it just doesn't happen a lot, period.
Okay, so we're changing the whole ordinance here, or the whole, I guess, part of UDO here, for one person that doesn't have enough room in the back for his building?
That's not how I would describe it. I would say the previous zoning ordinance we had this exact same setbacks that you see proposed here. So we're just having the UDO, should have been noticed when the UDO was originally being drafted. That changed and that mismatch between the previous zoning ordinance and the newly proposed UDO. So we're making it match the way the zoning ordinance already used to be to begin with. Also, the side yard setback newly proposed figure is merely just matching the same setbacks that the principal structure is already allowed. So to have an accessory structure be more restrictive than an actual principal structure also doesn't make sense too. I would see it as, yes, it is citizen-initiated text amendment, as anyone has the right to apply for a text amendment. You do the paperwork, you pay the fee. But it is correcting, in my professional opinion, adding continuity to the ordinance.
There's not 8-foot setbacks on the side for commercial?
Not commercial buildings in the CB zoning district, no. It's a 0 lot line setback.
That's what I thought.
Okay.
But it has a 40-foot front setback, correct?
20.
20.
More questions for Jake?
Just a clarification, if I may. So the position of the administration here is that we should eliminate setbacks for the furtherance of commercial development? Is that the position we're taking?
I would not phrase it that way.
Well, phrase it the way you like.
I would phrase it that we're having our setbacks meet and match the principal structure setbacks in this scenario. And also, we're not eliminating setbacks. We are still keeping a 10-foot rear yard setback for accessory structures. In fact, we're adding that in. And also, on a corner lot side by the road, we are still keeping the 8-foot side yard setback for corner lots as well.
The principal structure doesn't have a setback. So what you're saying is that it wouldn't make good sense to have an accessory structure have a larger setback than the principal structure.
That's a very good summary.
That's one way to put it.
Any more questions?
So if a principal structure is on one lot, is up to the lot line, and somebody comes in to build a principal structure up to the other lot line, which we've seen done, there's a firewall or fire, something required as far as fire protection.
Yes.
What about with an accessory structure?
I would, we're getting into fire code issues now, which I'm not a fire code
Well,
type
it would
person.
have to come from your department, because
Yes.
if whichever one built first, I mean, would you require the second person to do the fire protection, or would you require the first person? Thank you, Steve.
It came up at the planning board level. We talked about it at length.
That the fire codes would take precedence, and however close you are to a property line, there's certain rated walls you have to put in place. You can actually have a shared wall called a party wall on a property line. A good example is a little strip mall down here. It used to be called Red and White, now it's Beach Life. They have party walls. Those are individual lots. And what you also need to understand that most of your community district lots are only 20 feet wide. So if you have an 8-foot interior side yard setback on property line, you only have enough room for a 4-foot wide accessory structure. And this was changed during the old code of ordinances that we had for that reason. But we have to rate the building, once it comes past zoning, we have to rate the building for fire regulations to be sure that they have the proper rated wall to be within that distance of a building line. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Madam Mayor, may I ask a question along those lines? To Councilmember Bell's question, if you are the second accessory structure built up to the lot line, are they going, and they don't have this, is it a party wall? The first structure doesn't have that. Is burden on the second building, are they going to have a higher standard to meet to build up to the other one?
For the first accessory structure to build that close to the property line, he has to have a rated wall as well.
Okay, so it's the same?
It's the same.
Does that answer your?
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
So it wouldn't be an extra burden on the second person, because the first person is going to have that party wall or that rated wall as well, because of them being that close to the property line.
The burden is on each property owner to
Got
meet
it.
the fire codes.
See, that changes.
So instead of having 2 buildings that could be side by side, we could actually here have 4 that are almost touching, correct?
That
gotta
may
have
be
it.
theoretically possible if I understood your question. When you say 4, you're talking about 2 principal structures and 2
Yes.
accessory structures?
Yes.
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 Yeah. But like I said, these lots are only 20 feet wide in the old Long Beach section, 25 feet wide in the Yopon section. And you do see that all the buildings are together.
Okay.
You say something.
But what's important to understand about a firewall is that it's a fire barrier to protect one building from burning down another. But it's not just the fire barrier. It has to be built structurally to withstand a collapse on either side of that wall, with that wall maintaining its integrity and its structure.
That's the definition of a party wall.
Right.
The fire
It's a
barrier
firewall.
is different, yes.
Right. So it has to be structurally built not just to prevent fire, but also to protect it in collapse. So that's to protect one building from another, so.
A good thing that you may have saw after the hotel burnt down there, Ocean Crest, on the eastern end, you saw that masonry wall that was still standing. That's what helped keep the spread of the fire from taking the house out.
Right.
That and the
And
fire
we-
department's
and we did a good job,
surround
too.
and drown. Surrounded, but if that wall hadn't have been there, it would have been, the flames would have gone a little quicker. But it wasn't surround and drown, is that what y'all call that? Any other questions that I could answer?
Thank you, Steve. All right, any more questions, anyone? This time I'll entertain a motion to close public hearing number 3.
So moved, Madam Mayor.
Please. All in favor? And you may take action on this proposed text amendment tonight. Anyone like to make a motion?
I'd like to vote no, Madam Mayor, just for the record. Thank you.
Okay. Does no one want to make a motion? No motion? Okay, no motion, then it dies for lack of motion. Correct, Lisa?
There's just no action taken.
Okay. Okay, public hearing number 4. This public hearing is a proposed text amendment is citizen initiated. The applicant submitted a sign permit for a monument sign at the front of proposed subdivision, which was denied because the sign exceeded a maximum square footage permitted for signs of that sort. The applicant requests that the maximum square footage for the sign be increased to 30 square foot for each signage on the mainland side. The proposed wording and the UDO definitions are attached. The planning board recommended approval. Anyone sign to speak?
No, ma'am.
Any council member like to have Jake come back and, come on, Jake, just don't leave, just stay up there. We're almost finished.
Do you want me to give a staff report?
Please.
Okay. Like the mayor said, it is citizen initiated for monument signs. This one, which sparked it, would be at the front of a proposed subdivision, which is typically where you see them in front of large subdivisions. To give you a little history, the applicant submitted a sign permit application, which was denied, and so they followed up with a text amendment. It did go before planning board, and they had made some revisions that were agreed upon by all parties, and then they recommended approval after that was done. The section of the ordinance this would apply to is section 10.26.1.1. It's the section of the ordinance that deals with residential monument type ground mounted signs. The square footage is 30 square feet. That's to be proposed. Currently, I believe it's 14 square feet that is capped at. And it applies to mainland side only, not the island side. So it would not increase the square footage of those sorts of signs that are allowed on the island in front of condominiums and other multifamily type places. And also, I believe the applicant's here in case you guys have any questions for them too.
Any
So,
questions?
indeed, thank you, Madam Mayor. So, Jake, I'm having difficulty with the UDO being bifurcated between the island and the mainland, because my understanding of that concept is it's a UDO for our municipality. And it seems to me that we're constantly one-offing, changing things for the mainland. And, smaller setbacks, larger signs, I'm concerned about that kind of a trend because I think, as you mentioned earlier, we need to be consistent. And we need to have our ordinances enforced uniformly across the municipality. And this is initiated by a developer, it was denied, now suddenly we have an amendment to our UDO because it's the mainland. So I think we need to give some serious thought to that, whether we're going to have 2 UDOs or we're going to have 1. And as Councilman Scott referenced in the earlier matter, that we're constantly changing things because someone doesn't like something. That's not my sense of how this should work. So I'm concerned about what would happen if we adjusted out the UDO for the mainland and had a different UDO for the island. And I'm sorry, that's less a question and more of a kind of philosophic statement. And please feel free to reply.
Reply. Okay. From a review point, or as far as sign review for compliance, sign permit applications, and from enforcement, it wouldn't, for our day-to-day in development services, would not provide really an added level of complexity or difficulty in doing our jobs that would really worry me in any sort of way. The mainland side is different than the island side, and it does have different needs. The previous zoning ordinance, the signage portion, was written when there was no mainland annexation. It was only island side, and then all those existing sign regulations stayed in place, as the mainland, which is actually geographically larger than the island side, even though the population's down here, grew. As you know, UDOs, development and zoning ordinances, are living documents. Yeah, it's all about, they did compromise. They had originally requested 45 square feet and were amenable to 30 square feet, so it wasn't, oversized in the views of the planning board. That's about all.
So, Counselor, if I may ask you a question. Let's suppose that we adopt this and lo and behold, a business on the island wants to create an exception, even though this ordinance says it's mainland only. Are we going to be in a defensible position if that happens, having granted the exception to one part of the municipality and now someone wants it on the other side of it?
That's a good question.
Well, I mean, certainly, I would say my initial response is yes, we would be. I think that given the population density and the build out on the island side versus the mainland side are two completely different scenarios. So therefore, the planning goals are different. You're not setting a binding precedent by this to make it applicable on the mainland side, but you would have to articulate why, possibly have to articulate why you wouldn't modify it on the island side since you've already done it on the mainland side. But I can tell you, I think that would be relatively easily defensible if you look at the build out where we are here on the island side versus the mainland side.
Well, we have discussed what a precedent means or doesn't mean before. I'm just going to say, looking at the rationale that the applicant provides, I could easily envision a business yet to be developed on the island, a condo complex, God forbid, that says, well, here's my rationale. This would help business. I have a lot of retired people. They can't see the sign. I need a bigger sign. And then we're going to be in a bit of a quandary, it seems to me. I'm pleased to hear you say it's eminently defensible.
Councilmember Bach, when I say precedent, sir, I mean legally binding precedent. That's the manner in which I state that word.
Yeah, I understand. But there's precedent and then there's precedent. There's a political precedent of someone getting an exception, someone else turning around and saying, I want the same exception. And that, frankly, puts us in the position of having to defend what we did. And I understand.
And again, if I heard you correctly, Jake, planning board look at this?
Yes.
And they, I mean.
They recommended approval.
Theoretically, that's obviously they're not binding precedent. They're advisory or recommending body. Presumably, they looked at the long-range planning objectives of the town and the needs of the town. That's one of the reasons that board exists. And while you are not obligated to follow their recommendation or approvals, I certainly think it merits consideration.
Indeed. I am giving it consideration. That doesn't mean I accept it.
Yes, sir. Not suggesting either way, Mr. Bach. I'm just saying that.
I know you're not counsel.
These things, by the time they get to this board, hopefully they're properly vetted out by people that specialize in this area. So that's simply my point.
Jake, there are several subdivisions slated for the other side of the bridge, which we refer to as the mainland. This will probably be the same issue coming before the board with those subdivisions in the future. Is that what do you agree with that statement?
I would, and I would add to it, and this would address even in more detail Councilor Bach's latest question to me. We also regulate differently with commercial versus residential versus industrial standards as well. Pine Forest is a very large development. It's over 3,000 acres. Correct. There's going to be a lot of units and single-family residential, et cetera, going up on there. For a project of that size on that scale, it is not uncommon for a flurry of several different sort of text amendments as they're discovered to be applied for such a large development. We have another one coming up next month from them. So it's just part of the practice. You can approve it, you can deny it, it's fine, but they can keep applying just like anyone else could. And, this is how you sort of discover certain things that may need tweaking or updates. Yeah.
Should this been addressed when we were developing the UDO several years back? Is that another one of those things that kind of got missed and nobody thought about it?
That's hard to say, because this one's pretty nuanced and in the weeds and buried pretty deep.
Don't mean to put you on the spot. Would anyone like to hear, would the applicant like to speak? Come on up.
Good evening. My name is Mark Bramble, here representing Pine Forest. At the planning board meeting, we actually discussed this at length. To put it in context, what we're asking for is a monument, an entry statement, something to announce you've arrived at a development or at a neighborhood. Your sign here, if I take this off the wall, it's conforming under your current ordinance. I put it on this wall, the background becomes the sign, and what we're asking for, or what we've agreed upon, is 30 square feet. That's not even a piece of plywood. County standard 64 square feet. Non-conforming sign, if you up your screen, what's behind would be a non-conforming sign. 30 square feet is not a lot when you think about a wall. You have a wall, you put letters on it, it's now an entry statement. If it's under 30 square feet, it's just not going to work. And I think the planning board understood that, and that's why they made this recommendation for you. Thank
What
you.
is the sign that's out there now that says Pine Forest? Do you
Well, it would be, actually, it's probably non-conforming under the current ordinance.
Okay.
And again, the county's is 64 square feet.
Help put
Thank
in, help put in perspective for everyone.
Okay, let me ask one quick question, Jake.
Which, Jake?
So I understand this. You said, I think you were the one who said that it's a, the UDO is a growing document. Okay.
Breathing.
So that's what we're talking about here is that document's going to change as the mainland, for lack of a better term, changes. So we're going to come to different situations with different types of structures where we're going to have to make exceptions to the UDO as the years go by.
Well, it's not an exception, it's amendment, but yes, its concept's the same. And the law's the same way. I mean, Napoleonic Code law was all statutory, no need for courts, but we all know the law ever evolves and courts interpret facts and circumstances as it evolves over time. I'm not advocating on this particular request one way or the other. I'm just saying it is not uncommon. In fact, it's quite common to have text amendments to UDOs. You cannot foresee every fact pattern.
Correct.
Thank you.
Any more discussion?
Jake, what's the dimensions of 30 square feet?
Well, it could vary. The specific sign that Pine Forest has applied for, you could have it really long, or really short and tall, or vice versa. Or it could be some sort of odd shape like theirs is, where they have like little individual pieces, and some points is long and other parts is shorter, and it goes back and forth just for an aesthetic sort of vibe to it. So it just kind of varies depending on how it's designed. But we require drawings to verify that the dimensions are not exceeded before we'll issue a permit.
One more quick question, Jake, and then I'll for a motion. If Oak Island had a welcome sign on that side of the bridge, hypothetically, would it have to be only 15, was it 15 square foot? Is that what it is? What would be the average side of a welcome sign, like when you see in other towns?
They've applied for 30 square feet, but it also kind of depends on the type of sign you're talking about. There's different square footage regulations for wall signs, freestanding signs, which sounds kind of like what you're describing, monument signs, like a good example of a monument sign would be, there's several different kinds of monument signs. In front of a church where they have the little lettering that they'll change out every week, that's one, or like the new one by Publix where they might have different sides for the little side unit businesses.
Well, the monument sign would be what I would think the Welcome to Oak Island sign would be, and my guess is, from ones I've seen and taken pictures of, they pretty close to the 30 foot, 30 inches, I mean.
30 square feet, it's hard to say. I mean, a sign that you described, I imagine you would probably want in the DOT right-of-way to be right out front, and in that case, you'd be talking with DOT about what their
Right,
standards
exactly, I
are and the
understand.
site triangle
I
and
was
all
just
that.
saying hypothetically in the future, if we wanted a sign, it would probably be close to that same size, if you were going to be effective. Thank you. Any more questions for Jake? Any more discussion? It's been approved by the planning board. At this time, I entertain a motion to close public hearing number 4.
So moved.
Second, all in favor? You may take action on this proposed amendment tonight.
Madam Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to approve the proposed text amendment and to adopt the associated plan consistency statement.
Second.
All in favor? All opposed?
No.
Okay, thank you. All right, that does bring us to the end our public hearing for tonight. And I understand we have a presentation by the Quilters. Ms. Nolan is going to come forward. I understand you have a surprise for the town. And would you introduce the organization that, tell us a little bit about it?
So, me and my friend Judy Slater and Marie Frazier, we belong to the Oak Island Quilters. We meet every Wednesday morning at the rec center, and we do different projects, different charities, things like that, Quilts of Valor. Anyway, so we decided that we would make a Christmas tree skirt for the town, so we want to present it to you today.
Thank you. I'm going to ask my pro tem to come up and accept it for the town. Jeff?
And I'd like to get a picture if that's okay.
Awesome. Oh my gosh, that is beautiful. Oh my gosh.
Wow.
Woo! Wow.
Postcard on it and everything.
Oh, that is exquisite.
Now we just need a Christmas tree. It's beautiful.
It's a lot of room.
Wow. That is exquisite.
I love the Coast Guard insignia, that's great.
Thank you, we're very grateful.
Thank you.
Hey, Lisa, I have one question. How much time do you guys have in that, just out of curiosity?
Wow.
Thank you so much. That's gorgeous, really is.
Yeah. Y'all need to sign the back of it so we can have it in. Oh, cool.
Outstanding.
Absolutely. I'm sure the town will protect it with its life, correct, Lisa and David? Thank you so much.
David's ordering a tub.
Well, we'll probably put it up around Thanksgiving. That's what we usually do. So this will be down in the lobby.
Anne-Marie has done on there. It's exquisite. It really is a wonderful, wonderful job.
Yeah, it was beautiful. It's a great representation of our island.
Yeah, we put the syrup on. We tried to tell a story.
Yeah.
I made sure the turtles were on there.
And it's heavy.
Good girl.
You're welcome. Our pleasure.
Thank you.
Sure, our town manager appreciates that.
Thank you, Councilman Weinkoff. We have the pleasure, Moffett and Nichols Representative Johnny Martin. Welcome again, Johnny.
Thank you.
We've become close friends over the last 4 years.
Yeah, we have. And I will try to be quick,
All right.
because I've I've been told that we need to do that, so I have Katie Finnegan is here as well, and so let me get here to the full screen mode. Okay. All right, well, as always, there's lots of different things going on, so we'll go through these quickly. So we have some things to talk about, like Woods Folly, some of the state FEMA grant reimbursements for Post-Florence that we've been applying for, a NIFWIF grant that went in today, thanks to Katie and a few other people at our shop. Update on the 2019-2020 renourishment project that we're planning on doing this winter. Also the one for next winter, the master plan, and then Katie will come up and talk about some of the annual surveys that we have been done and also what we surveyed after Dorian. So I'm going to go through these pretty quick. So the SDI-5 permit, this is the one that O'Brien and Gear has been working to get for the town. We have the CAMA permit, and we were still awaiting the Corps of Engineers. We reached out to them, and we're hearing that the Corps will give that to us within a couple of weeks. So again, this is the same permit that the Corps has to, allow to maintain to the current depths and alignment that the Corps is able to do. So that'll be a nice thing to have in the town's pocket. Some things that have been going on, the Corps of Engineers, we found out, had completed a project back in February, March at federal expense with nearshore placement, but they placed it offshore of Holden Beach. So we have asked them and continue to remind them that the town has an interest in also doing a nearshore placement project. So we want to be on board when the next one happens. Just wanted to also update you, we've been kind of with these surveys looking at this hole that's offshore of the west end, and this is just one that was in 2018. So what you can see is that it's actually before it was around this area. So it has moved toward the inlet and has spread out and shallowed a little bit. So we'll just continue to keep track on that and seeing how the shoreline's responding and seeing what we can learn from that data. There's also some inlet dredging that is going to be ongoing. I think you guys have that in your consent agenda tonight. That's one that's with the Merit, with the Sidecaster, that's really just for navigation use. And it's one that the county's been coordinating with the Corps, and I think the town and Holden Beach have both been asked to pay $37,000 towards. We had it in October, but it's in November, so I think they'll be doing it this month. And this is just a graphic to show where, it's out on the outer bar is where they're planning to do this dredging to sort of clear that from a navigation purpose. But there again, this will not be with the shallow draft hopper. It will be with the Sidecaster, so it's the one that's just, with the pipe that spills it 100 feet over the side. We also found out that while there was a AIWW crossing project that was done last year, that the town got the sand there. The Corps is also doing one again this year. It usually happens on a 2-year cycle, but I guess they've had some additional shoaling this year, probably with some of the things with Dorian and some other things. And, but anyway, they are also looking to do a 135,000 cubic yard project with placement on Holden Beach. As soon as we found out about it, we reached out to the Corps, and we're requesting that the next project be placed on Oak Island. So I'll talk about some of the post-Florence reimbursement requests. So again, we've submitted that, and we submitted an extension letter in July and provided a timeline and progress update in October, and we still haven't heard back about the approval for that yet. We're still waiting to hear back from that. However, we have received monies for the surveys for the post-Florence work from the state. We did hear that the $18.5 million that was done for post-Florence from state funds, we submitted a request for $5.3 million. We were awarded 3.1, 3.2, and the governor signed that on November 6th. And we're hopeful that the recent language had something in there about being able to provide the money up front and it not be a reimbursement. So we're hopeful that we'll be hearing about that pretty soon. But now that will not be for this winter's project, it'll be for next winter's project. Another aspect that came out through legislation is there was also potential for a language talking about an additional $2.5 million through House Bill 966, $2.5 million per community. So we're watching that and waiting to hear when the grants application process will be open for that. So now we'll talk a little bit about the National Fish and Wildlife Grant that has been put in, or NIFWIF. So the proposals were due today. We turned a proposal in asking for $1.5 million for this year's or this winter's project, and $3 million for next year. We should hear about those awards in March of 2020. So again, I'm going through this pretty fast, so if you want me to stop or have any questions, feel free to stop me. But we're going to talk now about the project plan for this winter. So we had for FEMA, the FEMA reimbursement for 364,000 yards. The FEMA authorization was roughly for $6 million, and the state contribution of $2 million for 8. With the town funds, and talking with David and Lisa, we're planning on a project of roughly $11 to $12 million. The project volume we're estimating for that is roughly at a maximum 860,000 yards, and we want to build a 25-year dune and base for East and Central Reach. So that's a dune that would withstand a 25-year storm. It's not 25 years of protection. And again, we're not able to put out a berm in front of it just because of cost. It would be a much more expensive project, but at least we can start laying the groundwork for, an overall system. So the anticipated project extents will kind of start there at roughly 290, or kind of where the core project stopped, and we will pick up there and go as far as we can with the monies that we have. We've set it up as a base project and 2 add alternates. So if we start at 63rd Street and go west, the base project stops somewhere between 22nd Place and 19th Place East. That would be roughly 530,000 cubic yards. And then we have 2 add alternates, and again, it'll just depend on what kind of bids we get, how far we're able to go. But we will go as far as we can with the amount of money that we are currently planning for, and what we don't get done this year is what we will plan to do next year and pick up with next year. So the typical nourishment section is we're showing on average a 7-foot high dune, and what I mean by that is the backland side is on average elevation 7. It's higher in some areas, lower in others, but we're talking about a dune that would be between 13.5 to 14.5 NAVD. What we built during the last time we went through was anywhere from 11 to 12 feet. So what you can imagine is that the dune structure will be 2 to 3 feet higher than what we built before. So it will be a bit higher. But there again, we're just trying to provide as much protection as we can for the budget that we have. The dune crest will be 6 foot wide. The planting will occur on the dune crest and the back slope of the dune. We know that the waves will kind of eat at this pretty immediately probably, so we don't want to put plantings on the front side of the dune. It'll go down at a 5-to-1 slope. We originally had 4-to-1s. There were some concerns about the slope. We changed that to 5-to-1. It goes down to about an elevation of 7 and then goes out at a 1-on-20 out into the water. And it'll tie in about elevation -10. So the proposed schedule is the project is out to bid. Sam Morrison and Katie will have a pre-bid meeting here tomorrow. We're planning on a bid opening on November 26th. Hopefully we'll have 3 bids. If we do not, we will have to delay a week due to state and federal rules. We're hearing that we should be getting the permits by mid-December. We're working on some comments to some of concerns that Caswell and Bald Head Island have brought up. We're turning those in next week. So we're hopeful for the permits to be received by mid-December. A notice of award in January 1st, beginning construction February 1st and finishing April 30th. So that's what we're planning for this year. So for next year, again, what we will have is we will get some of that money back from what we're doing this year. So we'll have that money back in hand, roughly the $8 million that we're planning for reimbursement. So hopefully we'll hear from FEMA on the 8.2 million, and we'll have the 3.2 from the state. Again, we'll find out if there's the potential for the additional 2.5 million. Also, if we hear from the NIFWIF grant. So all those numbers add up to a lot more than 11 to 12 million, but what we'll do is we'll assume 11 to 12 million dollars. But there again, if the bids come in high for this project, then we can't go as far as we want. If we get some more of these funds in, we'll just, add that on and pick up those pieces for next year's project. And hopefully that'll end up taking care of the rest of the island. So the master plan update. So there again, we've made a little progress. We've been mainly focused on these two other projects, getting them permitted and in the way. As you guys remember, we had issues with not the central reach area that we were hopeful was going to turn into being our borrow source. Did not turn out to have enough material, so we kind of had to call an audible and do the work off of Jaybird Shoals. So anyway, what we've been doing on the master plan is we did finalize that initial project volume. That is, after we do these other two projects, what we're planning on, or what we think will be, is roughly another 1.5 to 2 million cubic yards. We're still saying to plan for a budget of $25 to $40 million, and we think that borrow source is probably going to be Frying Pan Shoals. And what we would do there is whatever is lost in the dune in between now and then building out a berm out in front of it to provide that level of protection. So initial discussion with the agencies concerning Frying Pan Shoals is leading to a multi-year approval process for permitting lightly. The construction budget may be reduced depending on the timing and amount of the post-Florence reimbursements, so we'll see how much of these grants come in and if we can do more. And again, we're talking with the town about cash flow and volume reporting and the reimbursement schedules, because that's all going to be key to the overall implementation of all these phases. There's lots of moving parts here, as you guys can see. So there again, we're still saying that 1.5 to 2 million yards for the initial project. The volume for the maintenance need, we're estimating 200 to 250,000 cubic yards needed annually. And if we assume a 6-year maintenance cycle, that's roughly every 6 years doing a 1.2 to 1.5 million cubic yard project. And so the total volume for the 50-year maintenance need might be an additional 10 to 12.5 million cubic yards. So the field investigations, we're talking with BOEM now, so another federal agency that if you're outside the 3 miles from the shoreline, you have to get permission for them to even do the investigations. We are in the final phases of doing all the work to clear those sites to make sure that there's nothing there that if they go out and you have to clear the sites for, say, shipwrecks and things of that nature, just because they don't want you to go out there, poke holes, and hit a shipwreck. So we're having to do all that work, field work, before we can actually get the permit to go out and drill the holes. And we're still working with the state and on the upland permission for the upland sites. So there again, we've looked at a lot of places offshore of Oak Island, and you can see that most of them have turned up to be no's. The area that you see there for the Jaybird is what we're saying is the partial, is what we're planning for this year and next year's project. Okay, with that, I'll turn it over to Katie to talk about the shoreline mapping and the monitoring that's been ongoing.
Any questions for Johnny before he sits down?
Well, I'll stand up here.
Okay.
I'm going to try and talk as quickly. That was really fast. So as you know, we do annual surveying, and we also survey after storms at your request. This is just showing you where the survey information is collected every 1,000 feet across your entire 9-mile shoreline, and we group those survey profiles based on similar characteristics, so I don't have to talk about each individual one. I'll refer to East End, East, Central, West, and West End for observing the different trends we look at. So I just want to kind of briefly look at the 2018 survey and comparing it to the 2019 survey. You can see the dates where it was collected, and of course in between that we also had Florence. I'm not really going to focus too much on the results of Florence, but I will talk about how Florence has affected what we've seen over the past year. So just a little bit of background of how we calculate mean high water. The shoreline change you can see in 2018 in the blue, in 2019 in the red, and this was on the east end of the island where the Corps did their placement in July of 2018. So you can see where the black is at mean high water at 1.8, what we would measure as shoreline retreat, because the blue and the red, it's moved back. The other thing we'll do is we'll calculate volumes at various elevations, mean high water, your -5 being your wading depth, your -12 being your outer bar, kind of the volume that we consider for storm protection, and -20 to -25 your depth of closure. So I'll talk a little bit about those, and this is just a graphic of that. So you're looking at your profile here, and the ocean's on the right, and your homes are on the left, and you can see the different elevations that we're considering to look at how the beach is changing. This is just a graph of the wave height over the survey period from 2018 to 2019. You can see Hurricane Florence is called out there on the left in September, mid-September, having a wave height almost reaching 16 feet. The rest of the year was pretty standard. We consider wave heights above 8 to be somewhat concerning, and you had about a dozen of those over the past year. So here's a summary of the nourishment over the past year from July 2018. You see over there on the Corps where they did the placement from the Cape Fear River, and some of it went to Caswell as well. And then, as Johnny mentioned, you did receive the crossing event this year on the very west end of the island. So briefly to look at mean high water, again, this is the graph from east end to west end. The yellow is representing what happened from 2018 to 2019, and the blue is what happened from Florence. So what I'm going to point out is on the east and the central area, you'll see that the yellow line is above the blue line, which is implying that your shoreline, your mean high water, has recovered since Florence. In the other areas of the island, you see the yellow and blue are pretty close to matching, so not a lot of drastic changes had happened. So what I want to show here, you can see again the blue line is 2018, and now I've thrown in the green line as being Florence. So if we're looking at mean high water, and 2019 being in the red, so from the blue to the green was what happened in Florence, and since Florence, the green to the red, you've seen some recovery. And again, that's been more in the east and the central reaches, but in other areas it didn't really get drastically worse. So then all the volume elevations that I threw out before, this is what they look like graphed. The main thing I want to have you focus on here is that you'll see, so the red dotted line that goes across is kind of your 0 point, so anything below is implying you lost some volume, and anything above is implying you gained volume. And what we were seeing generally as a trend is that stuff that you were losing in the upper elevations, mean high water, -5 and -12, was being captured in the -20 to -25 elevation. So this is just a different way of looking at that for the different reaches. Again, you're seeing the west end, west, and central. You have those larger losses in the upper elevations, but then you're seeing the gains in your your deeper elevations. So again, this is another way of looking at the same information. All of the elevations, the ones that are in the more red color are implying the loss, and then the blue are implying the gain, and you're seeing that that gain is mainly happening on the west end, and again at the lower elevations. The other thing I would like to point out is what's happening at -12, because again, that's what we're considering your storm protection volume. So if you look at what happened between 2018 and Florence, and then what happened over the whole year of 2018 and 2019, how much of the loss was attributed just to what happened in Florence. And you can see that for the east end, the volume loss that you saw for your storm protection at -12, almost 50% of that was because of Florence. For the east and central, you had 80 and 68%. And then in the west end, you actually saw some recovery after Florence. Again, that's probably due to the crossing material that was placed in that section, kind of spreading around. And for Lockwoods Folly Inlet, you saw 27% of the loss being attributed to Florence. So overall for the island, what we were seeing is most of the loss you experienced was because of Florence. What that kind of looks like in a different way when you're looking at a certain profile, when you see the 2018 in blue and then the Florence in 2019 in the green and red, you're not seeing a lot of difference between the green and the red because, again, most of the volume lost did occur in Florence, so then the red line in 2019 wasn't that different. The other thing that we saw in Florence, again, as I was mentioning, was the gains at the lower elevations. So you can see how the green and the red with those arrows, how material has gained there. Briefly to talk about Dorian, so what we did was we compared the 2018 survey and then the Dorian survey. The Dorian survey was collected almost a week after Dorian came through, this September 4th and 5th, and there's just the track as a reminder. I'm sure you're all very familiar. So what we saw in Dorian was very, very different from what I just described over 2018 to 2019. So again, your red are going to be your losses and your blue are going to be your gain. So here you're seeing blue meaning gain, and you're seeing that's happening at the higher elevations, and the red is your loss at your lower elevations. So it's almost the opposite of what I just said from 2018 to 2019, where now your losses are happening lower, and then you're seeing that gain back at your upper elevation. And I'll kind of show you what I'm talking about in this sample profile. You'll see the blue is now 2019, and the red is post-Dorian. So you're seeing that portion in between about 0 to 8 has kind of moved up, and you've probably seen a building up of your beach, especially at mean high water and your recreational beach. And we're saying that that's been caused by the waves and the wind that you experienced in Dorian. Just to kind of summarize everything, we talked about Lockwood's Folly and your SDI 5 permit, hopefully going to be in your hands very soon. The nearshore placement that occurred on Holden Beach last year, and how we've let the Corps know that we're interested for any future events. And hopefully Lockwood's Folly will be being dredged as we speak. And as far as your FEMA reimbursements go, we're still waiting to hear about the $8.2 million from FEMA for Florence. The $3.2 from the state has been signed by the governor, and then there's an additional $2.5 million that we're keeping our eye out for, whether we can apply for it. As Johnny mentioned, the NIFWIF grant was submitted today for a total of $4.5 million for your next 2 projects, and that will be confirmed in March 2020. With the upcoming nourishment project for this winter, we've finalized all the documents, and right now we are working on bidding the project and getting the permits for December so that we can start construction January, February, and finish by April for the turtle window. For next year, we're going to have to continue discussing the reimbursements and the timing of that event and our cash flow with the town, and of course, just the final plan. As far as the master plan goes, as Johnny mentioned, we're ongoing discussions with BOEM about frying pan shoals. We've determined the volume need for your beach, and of course we'll continue the ongoing environmental studies and the Lockwood's Folly Inlet studies. And I briefly covered your annual survey and your Dorian survey, just to kind of look at what all that we've accomplished, the field investigations and the engineering and permitting for your current project, your annual and Dorian survey. And right now we're kind of in a holding pattern for a lot of your reimbursement requests, having submitted them successfully. Our main focus upcoming will be seeing you through the construction process of this winter's project, continuing our master plan field investigations, and starting to plan for next winter's project. That's it.
That was a flood of information, so.
Thank you so much. Anyone have a question? Looks like you're moving pretty rapidly now. It's taken a year to get to that stage.
Just keep your fingers crossed for bids and the permits and everything.
And there'll be some sand when we get there, is what you're saying? Sand
Well,
should
no,
be there.
we finally found some sand that we can use. Now we just
Awesome.
need to close the deal.
Very good. Any questions for Lisa? Thank you, Johnny. Okay. All right, at this time, we'll take a 10-minute break, and we'll be back. I don't have a clock, so I don't know what time it is. What time is it?
7:15.
Oh, 10 minutes, we'll be at 7:25. Please reconvene so we can.
It's like going to the dentist. But if you like data, just when he's trying to talk you through.
Just tell me, just give me the facts.
Here are the facts.
Yeah, Hatton's got 7,
Got enough money?
pay the numbers.
Out to pay for it.
Christmas already?
See, I got that
Oh,
part.
oh.
Was,
I got that.
I was proud of you. You're the only ones that.
We were working on easements.
Stuck in traffic, were you?
Beach traffic.
I mean, it was a good reason.
Okay, at this time, I'll call the meeting back to order. And we'll move along to the approval of the agenda. Is there any amendments or? Yes.
Madam Mayor, we need to remove number 7 off the consent agenda, and we need to add under new business memorandum of understanding between the United States Coast Guard Station, Oak Island, and the town of Oak Island regarding emergency fire response.
So we're moving number 7
Madam Mayor, I'd like to remove 2 and 4.
and 2 and 4 for discussion.
For discussion, yes.
And we don't need a closed session, so we can
Take that
remove
off?
that.
Okay. Any more adjustments? All right, this time I'll call for a motion to approve the agenda as amended.
So moved, Madam Mayor.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you, sir. Public comments section.
You got to
All
vote.
in favor?
Oh, I'm sorry, all in favor. Thank you. All right, public comment section. Do we have any?
First, we have Jerry Hardy.
Mr. Hardy, I remind you, we have 3-minute limit and give us your name and address, please, sir.
Sure. Jerry Hardy, 134 Northeast 11th Street. I'm here on behalf of the Beach Preservation Society Incorporated. Big things have continued to happen for our new nonprofit Beach Preservation Society. The second of our free public lectures will be Wednesday, December 4th at 7 p.m. at the 801 Ocean Event Center. This was originally scheduled for December 6th, but with the holiday tree lighting ceremony, we yielded to Santa Claus. But we do want to be sure that you attend. You do not want to miss Miss Terry Kirby Hathaway as she tells us the inside story of Sex in the Sea.
Oh, my.
If you've ever wondered about how marine and estuarine animals reproduce, then December 4th is your lucky night. Discover how, when, and where common marine creatures spawn while learning some new words for your vocabulary.
Awesome.
Bring your curiosity and be ready to enjoy yourselves while learning the love stories of these species. Register for free at our website, which is beachoki.org, and at the very top of that you can see the registration headline there. On Saturday, December 7th, we'll be in the parade, so hop on board with the new Beach Preservation Society. When thinking about the holidays, consider buying a new bike rack for beach access in honor of a family member or a business. And then also you can give memberships to the Beach Preservation Society as Christmas presents as well. We invite you to join our organization. Our brochure has a lot of information and also our membership forms. Thank you and happy holiday to you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dara Boyle.
Dara Royal, 216 Northeast 47th Street. Good evening. After reading information posted on the town's website about the FEMA 2019-2020 beach project, I have the following 3 concerns to share with you this evening. The first concern is about public access to the beach as a result of the project, especially handicap access. Of course, you wouldn't have to be in a wheelchair to find traversing the proposed project dune to be extremely difficult with a dune crest elevation of 14 feet. According to number 15 in the frequently asked questions, the emergency vehicle accesses will be the only locations where the dune height will be lowered. Will the accommodation for emergency vehicle access also enable handicap access? Can hatteras ramps be installed at these locations, and will there be handicap parking at each of these accesses? The second concern is about the cost of the project. According to number 17 in the frequently asked questions, how much will this cost me? The town is contributing additional funds from the General Reserve Fund, but no dollar amount is given. These additional funds will not be reimbursed. And since the source of these funds is the General Fund Reserve, it will be costing everyone who pays property taxes in the town of Oak Island. The question is how much? The third and last concern this evening is about the long-term cost of this FEMA project to the town. According to the CAMA permit application, the town of Oak Island will monitor the Castle Beach shoreline annually for 9 years post-project to investigate any potential effects which might require mitigation. How much will the monitoring and the investigation cost? What funds will be used to pay these expenses? And what happens if mitigation is required? I encourage you to proceed with caution. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Ms.
Mike,
Nora.
I'm sorry. Mike Pratt?
Hi, Mike Pratt, 308 Northeast 58th Street, member of the Oak Island Advisory Committee, and I have a few words I want to share with you about trees today. With the exception perhaps of our beautiful beach, nothing is more representative, more emblematic of our town than native majestic live oaks. It's our town's namesake, our town's emblem, and the name of our town's signature drive. Members of council, you may recall that the Environmental Advisory Committee had become aware of a matching funds grant offered by the North Carolina Urban Forestry Council for reforestation efforts following recent hurricanes. The Environmental Advisory Committee felt that this would be an inspiring opportunity to begin to place live oaks specifically along our town's signature street, Oak Island Drive, beginning in locations of greatest visual impact and need. However, at the time, there was a widely held belief that the town was discouraged, if not prohibited, from planting the public right-of-way along Oak Island Drive as it is a state-maintained road. I took the opportunity to investigate and discovered that, to the contrary, the State Department of Transportation actually encourages planting in the right-of-way as long as you follow their published guidelines, as they recognize and acknowledge the beneficial impact on aesthetics, stormwater management, and property values. At a prior town council meeting, you requested and so moved to support a submittal on behalf of our town, and I'm pleased to inform you, if you are already not aware, that we indeed have won this $5,000 matching funds grant. I'm also pleased to inform you that several of our business community citizens have expressed an interest in contributing financially to partially match this grant, and indeed, the majority of our initial intended planting sites are in high-impact locations near and around our local business partners. I look forward to publicly acknowledging them by name as we proceed. I would like to take this opportunity tonight to publicly acknowledge the contribution and efforts of a few of those who made this happen. From the Tree City USA Working Group of the Environmental Advisory Committee, Randy Olis and Diane Wetzel. Lee Butson, our former committee chair, and Margaret Johnson, our current chairperson, were also instrumental. And this, of course, would not have been even remotely possible without the extraordinary effort and experience of Kathy Bowes, proposal writer extraordinaire. We applaud Scott Thornell. Our new Public Works Director has valiantly stepped up to provide most of the muscle to plant these and make this happen. And I want to especially acknowledge Jake Vars, who has worked tirelessly with and on behalf of our committee to pull this proposal together and liaison with respective parties. Jake is an outstanding asset to our committee and to our town. Thank you, Jake. That's a proposal he put together for our town. And of course, we would like to thank David for enabling his team to participate, and you, council, for your support. Let's make this grant award and this initial planning be just the beginning, a kickstart, if you will, to a long-term commitment to plant 15 to 30 live oaks per year along our signature drive and in other appropriate public locations of high impact. I realize that this is truly a generation-skipping gift for future Oak Islanders, but it's hard to imagine a similar, more modest annual investment that would have a greater impact on aesthetics, on ambiance, on stormwater management, and indirectly on property values than establishing an inviting canopy of live oaks all along Oak Island Drive.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Pratt. Awesome.
That's all I have signed up.
Okay, with no one else speaking, any public comments, I'd like to call for a motion to close. Oh, I don't have to do that, sorry. All right, moving on. Going to the council reports. Councilman Wyckoff, we're going to start with you.
Yes, Madam Mayor, the town manager and myself went today to the North Carolina Beach Inlet and Waterway Association Annual Conference, where we got to hear some speakers talk about some of their goals and agendas for the next year. Trying to make sure if anything new came out, we did learn about it. Second, I was asked to meet with a group of individuals around the county with one of the Lieutenant Governor's reps, and he wanted to know what the struggles were with small towns. So I was very thankful to be able to meet with these people and give them our outlook, and I told them some of the main struggles we have is the infrastructure of our beach, being able to get the money to come in to be able to fund that. The other thing was stormwater. We had a lot of discussion about the stormwater rules and how it seems like the one-size-fits-all doesn't work here on Oak Island, and we had to lose a lot of our trees because of it. So it was a very productive meeting we had. He took a lot of notes down, and we have his contact information if we have any further issues. So that's my report.
Good deal. Councilman Blalock?
Thanks, buddy. Makes it tough to follow all that. I just want to thank a lot of folks for the veterans recognition. It was extra special to me being a veteran, but it seemed like everybody had a good word and a thank you, and I really do appreciate that a whole bunch. I'd like to have the tree committee consider outlawing palm trees. Is that something we can do? No? Okay, never mind.
Thank you, Joe. Scotty?
I have no report, Mayor.
The only thing I would like to say is don't forget November 15th is our next live and local. There'll be vendors and live music and food. November 15th in the park extension.
Right behind Town Hall.
December 6th, tree lighting. December 7th, the parade.
Councilman Bach?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to congratulate my fellow citizens on their thoughtful and passionate involvement in the recent election. The turnout numbers reflect civic engagement, which is the lifeblood of a small town democracy, so thank you for that. I'd like to congratulate my colleagues who were reelected and also acknowledge the mayor-elect in the back. And I would say this, I have great admiration for anyone who is willing to stand in the public square. It takes courage, and I thank you for doing that. And lastly, I want to thank you, Madam Mayor, for your skilled representation over the last several years. And on a personal note, since I am often in the minority, I have always found you to be fair and gracious, and I thank you for that.
Thank you. All right, I have no report tonight, so we'll move on to the next part of our agenda. Entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as amended.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Very good. Now we're going to move to the items that were removed from the consent agenda for discussion, and then we'll start with item number 2. Approval of recommended action to dissolve the Beach Preservation Advisory Board.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would just simply like to make a recommendation. I'm on page 27, the very last sentence. Also, staff recommends an unrelated amendment to the same section regarding advertising for board vacancies. The proposed change will make the ordinance agree with the amendment previously made to Council Rules of Procedure. I would submit that this needs to stand alone apart from the beach preservation action. I just think from a housekeeping perspective, that should be pulled out, tabled, and returned.
And Madam Mayor, I would agree with that, for posterity's sake, if nothing else, to make it two separate items.
Okay.
That's all I have on number 2, Madam Mayor.
So with that recommendation, do we vote on that tonight, Lisa?
You still need to make a
Take
motion.
action on the first part of it.
Okay. Entertain a motion, take action on the first part.
Perhaps a motion to approve this item
With the removal.
as amended by the deletion of the last sentence.
Second, please. Who would make the motion? I'm sorry, Brian, you can't make motions.
I was saying, if you just say, I
Yeah,
make
would
that
anyone like to
motion.
make that motion?
I'll make a motion to dissolve the Beach Preservation Advisory Board.
Perfect.
Second.
Well, as proposed, removing the last sentence of the
Well,
proposal.
it says, and amending section 2.91, so we're not going to amend 2.91,
So you're
correct?
going to take that out.
Yeah.
Ms. Bell's motion, as stated, does not include that offending sentence.
Second, please.
I'll second it then.
All in favor? Thank you.
I think somebody did have had a gripe about us not being able to make a motion, so note that, will you?
You made that on your own?
I made it all by myself.
All right, number 4, authorize town attorney to take legal action to acquire easements.
Madam Mayor, before we get to that, does the council want to take up staff's recommended unrelated amendment that was parsed out of the prior?
Item number 2, you
Item.
mean?
I would like to see that redeveloped as a separate item with the references made clear that this is amending an amendment previously offered. I mean, I will certainly support it. I know it changes the advertisement length, but it doesn't say that, and it's confusing. I think it just needs to stand apart.
So can we bring that back at another meeting?
Council's pleasure to have staff bring that back in December?
That's correct.
Yes,
Consensus.
please.
I would support that.
Thank you.
All right, number 4.
This is mine as well, Madam Mayor.
Okay.
And Councilor, these are just simply questions for you, for my enlightenment and public enlightenment. So we're seeking perpetual easements. Can you just explain what that is?
Absolutely. Councilmember Bach and council and members of the public, in order to move forward with these beach nourishment projects, we are required to go on what is technically private property on what North Carolina defines as the dry sand beach, which is the area landward of the mean high water mark that extends up to either the toe of the frontal dune, the storm escarpment line, the last line of stable vegetation, or the storm debris line. I think it's whichever's most seaward of that. That is where most people recreate on the beach unless you're going in the water. Most people think that that's public property. It's actually private property imprinted with public trust rights of recreation. We need these easements to go forward. A lot of the funding sources require them. A lot of the permitting agency requires them. And the perpetual aspect of it is a component that is required by the federal government if we're ever going to have federal funding on one of these projects. So instead of doing a piecemeal round of easements now for less than perpetuity, it is most economical to go ahead and get it in perpetuity in the hopeful event that we obtain federal funding. For another town, I've been dealing with the U.S. Corps of Engineers property division out of Savannah, Georgia. They've sent us a template of what they require for a federal funded project. So that's why we need the easements. The reason why we need this vote, there's a case handed down earlier this summer by our Court of Appeals that dismissed a lawsuit that was brought by a town because that particular town did not have a vote on record authorizing the town attorney to prosecute that claim. It wasn't a nourishment suit. In my legal opinion, the fact that we're authorizing the projects to go forward, that is an implicit authorization to bring the easement suits. But in light of the fact that the Court of Appeals handed down that opinion out of abundance of caution, I think we need to have a separate vote on the easements. we are doing this to be able to put sand on the beach and protect property and infrastructure. Part of Lisa, that's what Lisa and I were talking about at the break. We were getting some pretty good response from the public sending these in voluntarily, but we're on a clock here.
Right.
And so if we don't get them by a certain amount of time, then we have to bring the condemnation action. The good thing about this type of condemnation action is it's called a quick take. It means we're seasoned with ownership of the easement the moment we file the suit. But all this is going to happen quickly at the turn of the year, as you heard from Mr. Moffett earlier tonight. Mr. Moffett, Mr. Martin.
He wished.
He's getting so high. He's getting so high. He's getting so high on the food chain. They might change the name of the company. I know this is long-winded, but at any rate, it's an important component of these beach nourishment projects.
Thank you for that.
Okay.
I'm very clear on the definition. But since you raised the matter of suits, what kind of litigation challenges could we expect as you seek perpetual easement?
Well, I mean, yeah, I can't guarantee anything. I will tell you that in my personal capacity as town attorney for various towns, I or my office have procured well over 1,000 of these, and we've only had one entity contest our right to do it, and the court summarily dismissed that claim. I'm aware of litigation in the Outer Banks. It has not been a problem in Oak Island in the past for other projects, and if it becomes a problem, it will essentially kill beach nourishment. So I would think once people understand what these are for and understand that it's to add protection and value to their property and protect the town's infrastructure, that they won't be litigious and contest these, because if we don't get them, you can't do beach nourishment.
Yeah.
Or you have to skip that property, and a successful nourishment project's a monolithic project. You don't want
Yeah, I understand. I just wanted to identify our potential risk. It would seem self-evident that this is in the interest of the property owner, but seeking several hundred perpetual
Right.
easements, we're bound at some point, I think.
In my experience, particularly in Oak Island and southeastern North Carolina, people, once they understand the purpose of them, are cooperative and want to help move the project forward.
Thank you, Counselor.
Certainly.
Make that motion now.
Any more questions?
I make a motion to authorize the town attorney to take any legal action necessary to acquire easements for the entire beachfront for beach nourishment projects and work.
Second.
All in favor? Thank you.
Thank you, Counsel.
All right, number 7.
David, this is your little, there you go. He was almost asleep on you over there. Would you like to explain what we're doing here, Mr. Hammond?
Yes, well, I thought he had a question.
I did too, but he didn't ask it, so just go ahead.
Oh,
Yeah.
what I'm trying to do here is on our receivables for our sewer assessments that started back in 2010, 2011, we have identified, when I say we, Katie, the tax collector, and her staff and myself, we have identified 81 properties that were initially listed on the wastewater assessment rolls that I feel we need to go ahead and pay them off for the town. Most of them, of this 81, most of them are coming out of the general fund. There is some wastewater locations as well as water locations. I personally do not want to go and tell a bond agency who helped us refund our bonds that I'm going to write off $340,000 because we put locations on our initial numbers that we gave them that we shouldn't really have done. And that's one reason I want to go ahead and get this done at this point, because our 10 years of the assessment, as you well know, is running out in 2020 as it begins to.
So basically, all we're doing is switching money from one account to another to pay off the sewer assessments with whatever fund owes it.
Right.
Whichever department owes it.
Exactly, the department owns it, like fire stations, this building.
Or the sewer
Recreation
project, okay.
department, vacuum stations, water towers, those kind of locations.
So let me understand this. These are town properties. We're paying assessments that are in or not in the budget. We're transferring money, they weren't budgeted.
The budget amendment would be the transfer, correct?
Okay. And so is this a single action or is this ongoing?
This is going to be a single action.
So at this point, the account's reconciled, or
This will remove from the receivables that I've been carrying on the books, which is another thing, you know, I'm
Should have been done 10 years
leaving this
ago.
300 and some thousand on the financials of this town, and knowing that, after, you know, next year, if we want to pay it or we write it off. I
Why
personally
wasn't
do
it
not wanna write
done,
it off.
why wasn't it done 10 years ago?
I don't know. I can't answer that. It was supposed to have been around 2012.
If I recall, some of those properties were actually held in abeyance
Yes.
so
because they weren't buildable.
were these assessments carried as on the books, flagged by the auditor?
They were in the totals of the summary that I give him for them for wastewater assessments.
But that's not my question. Did the auditor flag it?
No, sir, they didn't. I did.
Should they have flagged it?
I don't think so.
Well, he can't. They have certain independent, I mean, that's a.
Right.
That implicates a legal question. I mean, David can certainly give his opinion, but I don't know if have the qualifications.
As a former auditor, and I walked in and I saw that the town had written off $340,000 of receivables, you know, that's going to
No.
raise a question.
Well, with all due respect, my question is designed to get at this. We hire auditing firms, we expect a result that we can trust. If, in fact, the auditing firm missed it, that's a concern.
And that's certainly a valid point, and I would, as opposed to having the town's finance officer address that, I think, and with Mr. Hatton's assistance, I'll be glad to ask that question directly of the auditor, sir.
Fine, I'd like an answer from the auditor.
Okay. I will let him know that he's coming in December.
More questions?
Just wondering. It's good.
It's good. It's good, David. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to transfer funds to pay the assessments for town-owned properties in the amount of $340,200.
Second, all in favor? Thank you.
And just to clarify, that includes approving the budget ordinance amendment to do that?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
All right, that takes care of the consent agenda items that were removed. We moved on to the committee appointments.
Just a minute, Madam Mayor, wasn't this was put on the agenda?
That's going to be new business.
Huh?
New
Oh, new
business
business,
number one.
okay.
Thank you. You're a good wingman, Scotty.
I'll try.
Committee appointments. Community Center Advisory Board, there's 3 terms ending in 2022, and we have 2 applicants, and the first one is Ron Jernigan. Show our hands. Okay, all good, Lisa. And Karen West, show of hands. All good.
Mayor, for this next one, if I could interject, the Par 3 Advisory Committee, we have that broken into whether you live on the island or whether you live in South Harbor or one of the POA communities there or not in that area. The only open position we have now is for someone who is not in the South Harbor or one of those POA communities, but we haven't had any applicants from someone in that area. John Weinbar did apply previously. I explained that to him. He applied again because the position was still open. So I wanted to bring it to council and also to let you know that we would have positions opening up in January.
So is Mr. Weinbar in the area that he needs?
He's not in the correct area for the position that's open.
So we have no one to vote on.
So I just wanted to bring that to council's attention.
So we have no one to vote on, correct? So it's a no-go?
That's up to council. I mean, in other words, council originally set the committee up this way, and I didn't know if that was, if you wanted to continue with that.
I mean, is it in a bylaw or
it's in the
rule or?
It's in the rules and regs for that committee.
And it's a no-go, we'll have to wait till. Thank you for bringing that to our attention, Lisa.
Will you send him a nice little letter and ask him to please reapply in January when he can?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Administrative reports, Mr. Kelly.
Yes, ma'am. We will be shutting down the pier on November 18th through the 22nd. What we have to do is finish the cross bracing, so we'll not be able to allow people to have access to the pier. We are looking to open it back up on Saturday, the 23rd. We're also changing operational hours to 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., and then we'll reevaluate them in December as well as we can see what people are doing. We'll also be closing the Southeast 55th boat ramp on Friday, November 15th, and we'll reopen that on Monday, the 25th. As you know, that's the one we're replacing with a new boat ramp at 55th. The contractor's ready to bring everything on site and to put that in place. We're also working on the town's new webpage and a new agenda program and live streaming. The webpage is currently to go on live on July 1st is what the timetable is. We'll continue to bring updates as we go and start asking some questions and stuff for the public as we're going through the process. The agenda and live feed or live streaming, it should go online in February and March. And I think that's going to be a big improvement for the town to be able to see everything that we have.
Oh, absolutely.
And we'll start posting some other sites that people can go look at so they can sort of see what we're talking about and what they should expect when we go live.
Very good.
Deal.
And that's it for this time.
Thank you. David, how about you, Brian? You have any-
Madam Mayor, I'm sorry, I have a question for Mr. Kelly. Well, first of all, I have a compliment. Thank you for, Mr. Hatton, thank you for the data on 801 and the detailing of the expenses. So we now have a full sense of our investment, what it cost, and we now know we're running in deficit as we thought we would. And I think that we need to continue to look at what it will take to get to break even and hopefully beyond that as we look at the bookings for the next, let's say, 6 months out. And I think at that point, council needs, in my opinion, council should reevaluate that project. I have a second question for Jake. And so for the last several meetings, I've been inclined to ask you, Jake, about right-of-way, which is a unanimous council approval for policy emphasis. And I see that the numbers are still consistent. They're flatlining at 12. Can you give me more information about what's happening with the right-of-way campaign for safety and denial of public access? Where are we with that?
Okay. I actually have a meeting this week with the town attorney where we're going to finalize the letter templates, and but that's our most recent action, and then after that it's a matter of sending out letters, and we've divvied up the enforcement zones among different staff people, so it's kind of diversified as far as who gets letters, Weston, Easton, and it's a healthy mix.
So, in essence, you've taken a survey, and I suspect identified the most egregious, right-of-way obstructions and/or things, objects denying access to the intercoastal or the beach. How many of those approximately have you identified?
We have an estimated range. There's no master spreadsheet for every single one around Oak Island.
Give me your estimate. I'm starved for data here. What's the number?
Sure. Based on our, daily inspections that we do driving around and whatnot, 700 to 900 estimated range. It's going to be years to complete a project like this.
Okay. So my concern has been looking at 12 on this page, but in fact, you're further along in this process, and there's a much larger number. I'll just add parenthetically, I predicted, and you're meeting next with council to decide where to go. Okay.
If I may, Councilmember Bach, we also met, was it 2 weeks ago?
Around there, yes.
A week ago, and one of the products of that meeting was we're going to start scheduling these type meetings. We do it away from my office, away from Town Hall. The COG was kind enough to let us use their conference room, and I thought it was productive. In addition to what Jake just described for you, we have roughly 12 to 13 zoning noncompliance violations in queue for suits?
Yes, 12 to 13,
I don't know how many of them are right-of-way obstructions.
a few.
Okay, so we're getting ready to pull the trigger on some actual court actions for enforcement. And as Jake mentioned, it's a work in progress, but I think we're headed in the right direction.
Thank you, Jake. Thank you, Counselor.
Kind of like we help Southport.
Did I answer anything for you, John? You good? Alrighty, no old business tonight, so we'll move on to the new business, and there was something added, a memorandum of understanding between the United States Coast Guard Station in Oak Island and the town of Oak Island regarding emergency fire response.
Yes, Madam Mayor, it was brought to our attention tonight. Can we?
Yeah, I just had one quick observation and suggestion, Madam Mayor. Under Section 4, Responsibilities, Oak Island Fire Department, subsection E. Two things about that. It reads, as written, will, comma, at a minimum, comma, provide equipment and personnel adequate to type or nature of the fire and or medical emergency. That appears to be a Scrivener's error or a typo. I think that should read equipment and personnel adequate for the type or nature of the fire. I could be wrong about that. It just doesn't read. But in addition to that typo correction, I think we need to qualify that obligation by saying will, comma, and then here insert to the extent reasonably possible. That qualification makes sure that we're not taking on a burden that we can't afford. And if there's, heaven forbid, an outbreak of several fires at one time, I don't want to be held in breach of this because we're already deployed somewhere else in town. So I think if we insert the qualification to the extent reasonably possible, that accounts for, number one, our financial wherewithal to buy equipment and hire personnel, and two, accounts for the use of resources in the event of more than one fire or emergency event.
Well, I think you're onto something, Counselor, but will at a minimum, why are we assuming the primary obligation for the Coast Guard Station?
Chris, you've been handling this one?
And I'll just, for the public's, this is their proposed language, is my understanding. I didn't draft this.
Caswell's closer, so I don't know what the answer is.
We're not necessarily assuming the primary response. Because they're federal, people have assumed in the past that that whoever is providing fire protection to the town of Caswell Beach is providing it to the Coast Guard Station. And in theory, that's basically what has happened. But the new commander that is there understands that he can have as many fire departments as he wants responding, but it's a memorandum of understanding as opposed to a contract, because we have a contract with Sunny Point, but Sunny Point has a fire department. So we provide mutual aid to them, they provide mutual aid to us. Coast Guard Station does not have a firefighters on them, so it's a memorandum of understanding. So it's not that Southport won't be providing that, it's just that they want us in addition to them, to my knowledge. So we're not necessarily primary. Like I said, they just want an additional fire department responding. Plus, on the medical side, we are a higher level certification because we're paramedics. So we've worked with the Coast Guard Station in the past on some smaller things, some training things that we've done that they've asked us to do. So they've asked us if we would also respond. I'm not opposed to responding. If you think about probably the last call that's happened at the Coast Guard Station, you know, years. So on that small piece of property, if something was to happen, I'm not opposed to us responding. I understand what you're saying about the wording in it.
Right.
But to tell you specifically why they want us to respond, I can't answer specifically why, but it doesn't mean that someone else is not. They're just adding us to their response.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, but that's not clear in the wording. You know, will at a minimum provide the adequate personnel and equipment for the emergency is different than saying we'll provide support as requested.
Well, I think my qualification addresses that, but in addition to the qualification I've suggested, if you want to strike the phrase at a minimum, I don't have any issue with that either. I think it accomplishes the same goal, so.
I would prefer we remove that, because essentially we're going to provide support as requested, what we can provide at that time.
The rest of the council agrees with that. Then my suggestion would be take out at a minimum and insert the phrase to the extent reasonably possible, and then fix the typo at the end of that sentence.
Are we gonna get them to redraft this and bring it back to us?
Like anywhere else in the county, there's, you know, if we're tied up on a fire, you know, and all of us, there's already automatic mutual aid from CCOM in Brunswick County. They're not going to not send anybody because we're busy. I mean, it's going to fall to the next closest fire department just by default. So we'd still be abiding that we're providing that protection through mutual aid. You know, so it's kind of already covered under the mutual aid contract that is countywide. But I do understand changing the wording, as you said.
I would just tell you as a lawyer, if it was the other way around and someone said, well, I want to qualify that by saying to the extent reasonably possible, I would have no problem with that change. And if they balk at that change, then that gives me some heartburn.
Well, I don't think they will, because they did, and we've already amended some changes on it, because I had told them when they first approached me that I don't make decisions to respond outside of my district. That goes to here, which is why it's here. And we even changed it to the town of Oak Island and not the Oak Island Fire Department as far as the memorandum of understanding. I don't think they'll be opposed to that change.
Right. And if they were, I would have to be convinced why. So my recommendation would be, so as to not draw this out another month or two, in the unfortunate event if there is something happens out there, that you approve it as amended, and then if they reject it, they reject it. We've done our part.
But if we're going to help them regardless, then why do we need a memorandum of understanding? I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me unless there's some problems that we don't know about.
There could be, but I'm not aware. But I mean, we've never been asked before, but we're being asked now.
But do we really want to get into the middle of a whatever that could or could not be, middle of, do we really want to go there? I mean, do you see what I'm saying? If you're going as mutual aid anyway,
we're not going as mutual aid anyway.
You can't tell me, Chris, if they hollered for you to come, that they had a situation at the Coast Guard station and they needed your help, you cannot tell me those fire trucks wouldn't roll.
No, if we were dispatched there, we would go.
That's what I'm saying. So why do you?
Right now, the fire department that is primary response to that area, we are not on their mutual aid list. So maybe that's the problem that you're talking about. I don't know. All I know is that they came directly to me with an email and sent this and asked if we would respond to them. And I told them, I don't make that decision. You're outside of our fire district, and here we are. This is where I sent it for your decision. I don't think it's an issue. I don't have a problem responding there, whether it's medical or fire or whatever else is needed. But I think the only way they're getting us there is this way.
Perhaps we should just table this and bring it back in December when there's a little more vetting and we have a clearer understanding.
I'm sorry?
Perhaps we should table this until next month, until we have a little more understanding on why and why is it necessary. That's Southport's area, isn't it?
The town of Caswell Beach is, not the Coast Guard station.
They don't cover the Coast Guard station?
They do, but through a memorandum of understanding.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying. It's been a misunderstanding that it's been part of Caswell. It's not. They've had a memorandum of understanding with Yopon. They now have a memorandum of understanding with Southport. They're just asking to have one with us as well.
Chris, you mentioned
competition.
You mentioned that they have a new commander.
Of the base commander.
Yeah, you mentioned they have a new commander. Is that correct?
Sorry?
Did you mention they have a new commander?
Yeah, well, he's not brand, but he's been maybe about 2 years, I think.
So would it be safe to say maybe he's just going back through and trying to patch some of the things that weren't done in the past?
It's probably just taking more steps than the previous commander, you know, and looking at emergency services here, you know.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, I have a question.
But again, it's not a competition. They've had a memorandum of, it's not a part of Caswell Beach. It is, the Coast Guard station is separate from the
Stands on its
town
own.
of Caswell Beach. So they have, they can have anybody they choose to respond, and they just want to add us to it.
Chief, do they pay fire fees?
Honestly, I don't know on a federal level. I really don't know. I'd have to ask the county. And because they're not in our district, I've honestly never paid attention to that. So I don't know.
Well, I can see how this would be a great benefit for the Coast Guard station, and I'm not opposed to helping. But, you know, whether they've had a fire there or not, I mean, I've never had a fire at my place, but I pay my way, and this is a big place, and I was just, you know, just curious about if, you know, we're just taking them on for free.
Well, they don't have firefighters on base. They have volunteered before. As a matter of fact, a couple of them had volunteered with Yopon when Yopon was still in existence, Yopon Fire Department. He did offer help if we had something major going on the beach, a major car accident, if we had a fire, he would send. Now, of course, these guys can't fight fire, but they would help us in any way they can. He would send his staff over to us with this memorandum of understanding to give us whatever help, support, and hands that we need. So he has offered to do that the same, and we would probably utilize that a lot more than they would utilize us going to them. Just saying.
Okay. Anyone like to make a motion to accept the memorandum as amended according to Brian's wording?
I'll make that motion. I just want to say, I think that our obligation is to protect our citizens, our cost structure, our fire department. But all that being said, if council's amendment to the memorandum does that for us, I think we want to be good neighbors. I don't know about the question of pay. That's interesting because they're federal, but I could support council's recommendation to amend this.
Well, yeah, whether you consider it tonight or not, I strongly recommend that you amend it if you're going to consider it favorably. Given some of the questions that have been posed, though, it might behoove us to look into whether they pay fire fees, what other mutual aid agreements they have, whether this one's going to supersede, well, I call it a mutual aid agreement. It's really a memorandum of understanding. And cross those T's and dot those I's. So.
Brian, is there a time of the essence? So could we table it till December? And
Can we just have them come in here and talk to us?
Table it until next month.
That would be awesome.
Till December.
I would request that I have Commander Josh Myers come up here to answer any of
That would be awesome. That would be awesome. That would be good. Yes. That would be good.
Oh, okay.
So can we table it till December?
You can, but there was a motion on, but I don't believe that motion's been seconded yet.
I'll withdraw that motion.
Oh, you withdraw, okay, thank you.
Now the matter can be tabled until next month.
Okay. You need to make a motion, table it, Brian. All right, thank you, guys. Thank you for coming. I'll entertain a motion to close this meeting.
So moved, Madam Mayor.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Thank you.